When we think about market equilibrium, what we are talking about is kind of this magical point here where the demand curve and the supply curve intersect. And this point is referred to as market equilibrium because at a price point of $5 and a quantity of 1,000 units per hour, we have a market that is stable. This specific point is also referred to as the market clearing price because $5 is the price that is just right for this market to have equilibrium where the quantity supplied of 1,000 is equal to the quantity demanded of 1,000. Okay. I've got a couple areas here. Area A, this represents the consumer surplus, which of course, again, to refresh your memory, is the difference between what somebody was willing and able to pay for a product and what they did. And so if we think about the demand curve as all these different economic actors, we can find the summation of all of their individual consumer surpluses by finding the area of this triangle. Now, since we're using straight lines, we could find this by taking 1/2 base times height, and we could actually get a mathematical answer. In higher level courses, when we're using graphs that use curves, you have to use calculus, and it's quite a bit more complicated. It's really beyond the scope of what we need to do here in an intro level course. We also have this area B. This represents the producer surplus, which is the difference between what a producer is willing to sell and what they got out of the market. And again, we can mathematically find that. And if we add the area of A to the area of B, we have total surplus, which is really the name of the game in economics. It's moving product and resources from somewhere of low value to high value. Okay. Now, sometimes markets have things that happen to them where we have to adjust to a new equilibrium. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this demand curve, and let's say that demand increases, so it moves to the right. Well, in this instance now, this price point is going to be lower than what the new equilibrium would be up here. So if the market has this as the price, you're going to see a shortage because there's an increased demand and we're going to run out of product because the price is just simply too low. So what happens in the market? Well, this increase in demand will start to put upward pressure on prices. And the producers, recognizing this, getting that price signal, seeing that, hey, we keep running out of these products, will produce more at the higher price because the higher price is providing them an incentive to make the product. And eventually we will get to a new equilibrium up here, whatever that price ends up being at whatever quantity. On the flip side, we could have a decrease in demand. Okay. And again, any of the demand determinants could shift, causing that to move to the left. So what happens then? Well, now the price would go from up here to down here because the lower demand would cause downward pressure on prices. On the other hand, if we increase the supply, increasing the supply would cause the price, oops, don't want to do that, would cause the price to fall down to here, and more units are being sold because the lower price will encourage more consumers to buy the product. And then, of course, the final piece is if the supply curve moves to the left, you will see upward pressure on prices and lower units being sold. Okay, so now that I've done that, let's look at some finished products here. So here's an example of demand increases, supply remains unchanged. And you can see we go from PE to PE prime. We go to the next one, demand decreases, supply remains unchanged. We go to PE prime, QE prime, and so on. Okay. Now, a lot of times in an intro class, we will work with one curve moving, but the reality is you can have situations where both curves will move because of something, okay? And a good example of this would be during COVID. During COVID, for example, toilet paper, you had increased demand for toilet paper because there was a fear, there was an expectation, if you will, that there were going to be shortages and people were going to be home for a prolonged period of time. And at the same time, you had supply chain issues. Some of the factories had to shut down. Not as many people were able to drive because of illness, whatever. And so you had a shortage that was driven by both increased demand and decreased supply. That, of course, would be a recipe, a cocktail for prices to shoot up. But at least in my area, retailers did not raise the price of toilet paper. And in the early days of the lockdowns, or when we first started kind of partially reopening, you simply saw bare shelves. It was just very hard to get a hold of the product because of the shortage. And so rather than raise the price, what they did was they created limitations to how many units somebody could buy at a time in an attempt to try to at least partially alleviate some of the shortages that individual families were running into. Now, in the early days of COVID, you also had a lot of folks engaging in arbitrage. And what this looked like was people were buying up large quantities of hand sanitizer, soap, and then they were trying to resell them on Craigslist or eBay or Facebook Marketplace, whatever, because there was such a shortage. And some of those folks were able to make some money that way. Other folks actually got their products confiscated because of the emergency, and it became an anti-gouging law situation in some states. Okay. And so the point that I'm really trying to make here is that if you just kind of think about these situations rationally without even putting them to a curve, but just think, well, what if all of a sudden everybody wants tickets to a particular concert? Well, that should bid up the prices because there'll be a shortage of tickets available. Okay. What if everybody tomorrow decides they don't like a certain brand of jean? Well, you're going to see them sitting in the shelves until Walmart or whoever sells them reduces the price. So a lot of this is pretty intuitive